thought about a very different introduction when I was going to come here, but let's wing it. I genuinely felt for a very long period in my life that I am the stupidest person alive. And the reason behind that was because I was in a job that didn't value my unique skill sets. I'm sure all of us have at some point in time felt like an imposter because we were in a situation or a job or in a classroom where we were made to feel like we didn't belong. And that's exactly how I felt for 2 long years in my consulting job. It took me a year after I quit my job to realize this one realization that everyone's a genius. But if you put a fish on a tree to climb it, it will live its whole life thinking that it's stupid. And that's exactly the position that I was in. So in my talk today, the only aim by the end of this talk is to help you not be in the same position that I was in. You see, when I joined my undergrad college, I remember I was given this list from the placement cell which said that these 5 companies, yeah, these are the dream companies. And all my seniors somehow told me that your life would be sorted if you somehow end up there. And without even realizing what that dream job was, I still to this day don't exactly know what consultants do. But I somehow wanted to get into the consulting job because somehow MBB was it. And once you got through it, your life was sorted. But in hindsight, it was probably the biggest mistake I ever made because I didn't allow myself the time to figure out what is it that I was really passionate about and what is it that I'm here to do. So in my gap year of 1 year that I took after I left consulting, there were 6 steps that I followed, which are the exact same 6 steps that I plan on sharing with you today. So let's get started. Step number 1 is reflection, which is so on point with today's theme, which is mirror, mirror. Because I think just like any other journey, the most important journey you take is probably on the inside. I think the first step is reflection. So sit down, ask yourself, what is it that I really enjoy doing? And I know it sounds absolutely cliche, but you'll be surprised by how many people actually don't go ahead and do it. When I sat down and made out that list, I realized that, hey, I love personal finance, but I also love marketing, which is also why you might know me as a personal finance content creator, but what you might not know is that I got here because I had my own content marketing agency, which is a story I'll get into in just a minute. So the idea is that we as human beings are multidimensional, but the problem with our education system, unfortunately, is that we're made to be in a box, like somehow, oh, you're really good with science, and you're really good with commerce, and you're really good at humanities. But what if I'm a mix of all of it, and I'm a plethora of other things which is never really tested, it's never really talked about? An exercise that I often recommend people do, and something that I do personally, is design your ideal week. And what that essentially means is that you note down what would an ideal work week in my life look like. Again, very surprising that many people don't think about it. Even I didn't think about it when I was sitting for my placements. And considering most of you are already are sitting for placements or are already placed, I think this is an activity that you should all indulge in. So basically, you ask yourself questions such as, what is my ideal work-life balance? And how much do I want to socialize with people? How much do I want to prioritize my health? How much do I want to prioritize my family? And these are not the questions that I came up all by myself. These were actually originated in an article by Harvard Business Review written by Peter Drucker, who is considered to be the father of modern management. In that article, essentially, he highlights that not everyone is supposed to be a team player, and not everyone is supposed to work in a team. A lot of people work better when they're all by themselves, which is giving birth to this new concept of solopreneurship, right? Now, people who are working all by themselves or in smaller teams or making billion-dollar companies. So this idea is absolutely redundant now. So to come back to the basics, figure out what is it that you want to do and what is it that you truly stand for. And that's exercise number 1. And we'll just come back to it in a bit as to why this is essential and how it played a major role in my own journey. Now, step number 2 is the go-to person option. What this means in simple language is that what do your friends and family come to you for? It's such an amazing litmus test to understand that what is it that other people see us, the light that they see us in, that we sometimes ignore. So to give you an example, I have two best friends from school, right? There's always a trio, right? So one of them pursued engineering and one of them pursued psychology. But both of them, when they got out of their undergrad and got their first jobs and got their first salary, came to me asking, what is ATC? What does that even mean? Like, is deduction necessary? Do I have to opt for a tax regime? Do I have to pay taxes? And all of those answers came so naturally to me. But this was back in 2018. I didn't even know that that would play a role in what I do today. But it's just that personal finance was something I was generally interested in. It was genuinely something I enjoyed studying about, not just in my undergrad, but also generally. I also come from a background where my dad's a CA, so finance was always a point of discussion in the house, even when I was a kid. So, to bring the point home, essentially, it's an excellent litmus test to understand what is it that I am truly good at and what is it that I should do going forward. Which brings me to the third idea, which is experimentation. This idea involves you going from being just a passive consumer to being an active creator. And what this means is that maybe on your list you have 5 set of things that you think you're good at, and people also assume that you're probably good at and you can pull off. But now is the idea to actually create around it and put it out on the internet for feedback. Because before you make that jump to full-time profession with that job, it's absolutely necessary that you can, number one, monetize it, and number two, escape the passion paradox. Now, what is passion paradox, Shreya? Have you heard this quote by show of hands? If you do what you love, you'll never work another day in your life. How many of you have heard it? It's absolutely very common, right? Like all of you have heard it. But let me tell you, as someone who does something that they love, not true. It's absolutely not true. But you have to be okay with that idea. To give you an example, when I quit my job back in 2020, a lot of people just assume that I'll become a travel influencer. Because at the time, finance influencer was really new in the market, not a lot of people were doing it. But travel influencer was, in market and in demand. And I remember people just assume that I'll just pivot to that because number one, I really like photography, and number two, I really love traveling. And I'll be fairly honest, I did give it a try. It just didn't work out. Because during that exercise, I realized I'm not meant to be a travel influencer because that time, probably of 3-4 days that I took off just to kind of relax, meditate, and all of that, became a full-time job in and of itself, which is not what you want, right? So you have to understand, out of all the passions that you have, number one, what is it that you can monetize and are genuinely good at? And number two, are okay giving up the passion paradox for. With that, we move to the next step, which is talk to people in the niche. Again, this is such a simple idea, but when I did it, it genuinely opened my mind to such new ideas. Again, when I quit my job back in 2020, because that's something that's proudly written on my resume, I remember I reached out to a photographer because, as I mentioned earlier, photography was something I was really passionate about, and I was even in the photography club of my college. And I reached out to an actual wedding photographer here in Delhi, and they said, hey, you know what? Why don't you assist me for one of the weddings that's happening in Delhi and figure out for yourself if that's something you really want to do? And within a day, I figured out that I was not meant to be a photographer, at least not a full-time, and at least not something that I would monetize. And the idea was that the lifestyle a photographer lives is something that I realized when I assisted a photographer for an entire day. I would have not known that otherwise. So something that I figured out within a day, it took me 2 years to figure out the same thing when I was in consulting. Had I already asked a consultant before I even joined a consulting firm, hey, what does a consultant even do? What do your days look like? I would have probably not joined a consulting firm in hindsight. Because that was not the lifestyle that I probably wanted for myself, which brings me back to the first point that we discussed. You remember designing your ideal week, how many hours you want to work, how much you want to socialize, whether you work better in a team or alone. So it all ties back to that. Which brings me to the next point, which is pivot. The idea simply means that you're okay with the idea of taking a U-turn. You know, in life, it's so funny that when we write a resume, we think that life happened to us linearly, right? Like we totally did that case study competition because, oh, I genuinely wanted that consulting job. But that's not how life happens, right? It's really haphazard. We do things, we figure things out along the way, and in hindsight, a lot of things make sense. For example, as I mentioned earlier, When the photography thing didn't work out, I pivoted to the next thing on my list, which was content marketing, which fortunately did work out. And in hindsight, I'm so glad it did, because that content marketing job is the reason why I became a content creator in the first place. Because one of the biggest fintech companies at the time in India reached out to me saying, hey, do you want to be the face of our YouTube channel? At the time, I didn't even know content creation was a viable option, or at least something that I could do, considering I was extremely camera conscious. I'm not now, but there was certainly a time that that was true for me. At the time, I didn't even know that was an option that existed, and then it became my full-time job. So the idea with pivoting essentially means that not every hobby is meant to be monetized, and that's okay. You can move on to the next thing and figure out on your list, what is it that you're really supposed to do? And then experiment again. Start the process all over again. And the last step in this process is be okay with the idea of starting from the bottom. I remember when I quit my job, again, I bring this up again and again because this is such a pivotal time in my life. I remember I genuinely loved what I was doing. Like, I was doing content marketing, I was working with some of the biggest brands in India, but I was not making a lot of money. And considering I'm a finance content creator, you can only imagine money did play a very important role in my life. And I saw my peers in consulting firms either go for MBAs at an institution such as yourself or abroad, or just, climb the corporate ladder within consulting. And anyone here who knows consulting, you'd know that it pays really well. So I quit that six-figure job, and I was down to making 1/5 of that in a month, and it genuinely broke me because financial anxiety is very real. And at the time I thought, is this it? Like, will I always be behind my peers? Always in life, because I just chose a path which was not something that paid out really well, considering VCP consulting were obviously the highest paying jobs on campus. But here's what I realized in that journey. The thing is, success, often we define it by one metric and one metric alone, which is money. Unfortunately, but that's not true. You see, success can be multidimensional. You can be successful if you have a healthy work-life balance. You can be successful if you have a good relationship with your family. You can be successful if you do have the time to exercise even after your 9 to 5. You can be successful if your manager on the job is genuinely interested in your personal and professional growth, which all of it was not true in my previous job, and I was getting in the next job that I was in. So you see, something you need to realize is that success is not something that is often described by society as money and money alone. It can be so unique to you, and it can be so personal to you, which is why it's very important to ask yourself that question: what does success even look for me? Is it a six-package salary and that alone, which is perfectly okay, by the way? Or is it something else? And then define that for yourself. And if it's something else, then be okay with the idea that you might have to start again from the bottom. The results will be exponential. I can promise you that. Like, once you start pursuing your own passion, the results that you get out of it generally are exponential. You don't get your normal 5%, 10% hike then. Because then you genuinely lean into what you're supposed to do and what you're meant to do, right? Which brings me to the end of my talk today, which is this idea that we're often asked in our placement interviews, which is, where do you see yourself in the next 5 years? So there's this interesting concept of Odyssey plan, which essentially asks you this question twice. Number one, what would the next 5 years look like for you if nothing changes today? Like, you do exactly what you're doing right now, you get in the job that you've gotten placed into, you continue doing what you're supposed to do and climb that corporate ladder. What would life look like? Are you happy with the outcome? If yes, brilliant. But if not, the other option is, what would you do if money and societal expectations were not a constraint? And how would life look like then? What is that one skill you would genuinely pick up if money was not holding you back, and what your family expects out of you, what your peers expect out of you, what social media expects out of you is genuinely not a concern? And when you figure out and you compare those two options, and then you make a decision of what you want the next 5 years to look like. To end my talk, there's a question that I would want to leave you with rather than an inspirational quotation, which is, what is it that you individually bring to the table that no one else can? And trust me, once you figure that out, life changes for the better. Thank you so much.